puts on a brave face. He pretends everything is fine. He doesn't care. War is going well. He's absolutely, panicking back in his bunker about all this stuff, because the only way that he can carry on doing this war is if the Russian people don't turn on him. And it's easy to prevent the people from turning on him if he's got money to slosh around out there. And he's been sloshing it around pretty well, paying soldiers a lot of money, paying the families a lot of money, etc. But if the money dries up, then he's got a problem.
The Ukrainians seem to be imposing their own sanctions on Russian oil. They've restarted. They said they never stopped, but they've restarted their attacks on the Russian oil infrastructure. Even the Druzhba pipeline, which supplied oil into various parts of Europe, has its pumping stations have been destroyed. And we're now seeing queues of traffic trying to get regular gasoline in different parts of Russia. So it's bringing the cause to the Russian people. Do you think the Ukrainian approach to imposing sanctions on Russian oil is something that will work?
Yes, it's working. As you've said, it's working very well. I mean, it's very interesting because, Trump has been throwing his weight around trying to get Zelensky and Ukraine to capitulate to Russia. That's how he wants the war. That's always how he wanted the war to end in 24 hours, was Ukraine to surrender. Ukraine, of course, has no intention of surrendering. And one of the things which he had done before was to link military aid and other types of aid to the requirement of not striking, not using, first of all, U.S. missiles going into Russian territory, but also not striking the oil infrastructure. And by Trump basically stepping away and saying, I'm not going to do any more military aid, he also loses the ability to limit what the Ukrainians do. And so the Ukrainians have been unbelievably good at this. And as of this morning, they have wiped out 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity. And I suspect that as time goes on, the numbers will continue to go up. Ukraine is really good at this. And not only that, but Ukraine has just put the finishing touches on a new long-range missile called the Flamingo missile.
The Flamingo.
And the Flamingo basically replicates, not perfectly, but replicates a lot of these long-range missiles, the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow missiles that we have been providing from the West, the United States and UK and other countries, in limited quantities. And so now the Ukrainians have, in their own capacity, these Flamingo missiles to go 3,000 kilometers into Russia. And as a result, I think you're going to see all sorts of interesting economic targets being hit. And if the West is not going to impose sanctions, then Ukraine will impose sanctions, and good on them for doing it.
Yeah, 3,000 kilometers and 1,125 kilograms of high explosives. That has a very nasty effect on oil refineries and other bits and pieces. But do you think Putin's actually worried? You know him better than most, and his inner team. What will they be saying? What will they be thinking? What will they be trying to do at the moment?
Well, so Putin puts on a brave face. He pretends everything is fine. He doesn't care. War is going well. He's absolutely panicking back in his bunker about all this stuff, because the only way that he can carry on doing this war is if the Russian people don't turn on him. And it's easy to prevent the people from turning on him if he's got money to slosh around out there. And he's been sloshing it around pretty well, paying soldiers a lot of money, paying the families a lot of money, etc. But if the money dries up, then he's got a problem, because all it takes is one social event, and then he loses control. And that's his biggest fear. He doesn't want 1 million people storming Red Square, because he can kill the leader of an opposition party. He can kill Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, but he can't kill 1 million people and stop an uprising. And so from his perspective, this is deeply worrying. They have got to figure out a way to stop it. At the moment, they have no way of stopping it. And this is a very good tactic, in the same way as when the Ukrainians did this amazing military operation of taking out 1/3 of the long-range bombers in Russia with drones. And so, the Ukrainians are extremely resourceful when it comes to fighting with smaller resources. And And thankfully, the Ukrainians are still well supported by the European Union, the UK, Canada, Norway, and many other countries. And so the Ukrainians, are a formidable force, and perhaps at this point, the most capable fighting force in Europe.
Oh, definitely the most capable and the most experienced. And Operation Spider's Web, that drone attack against the strategic bombers, was a masterstroke. And Zelensky clearly knew that he had not just the right cards in his pocket, but he had a full house, as Donald Trump was accusing him of not having any cards. But you mentioned the potential impact on the Russian economy and the Russian people. We're getting reports that indicate that Russia's budget deficit is nearing 5 trillion rubles, and non-military sectors of the economy are stagnating. We're even getting reports of some of the military sectors having difficulty in the manufacturing output because they're not getting paid. Is this getting close to a collapse in the Russian economy? Or do you think this is just a sort of slow, longer-term decline? And how long do you think it is before Putin will get exceptionally worried, or the people will start to rise up?
Well, I don't think we're anywhere near a collapse of the Russian economy, because specifically because in addition to the oil refining, which they do, they also export a lot of oil, and the buyers of that exported oil pay, the China, India, Turkey, they pay hundreds of billions of dollars a year to Russia, and that's a lot of money. And so I don't think we're even close to a collapse of the Russian economy. But if we were to find some way of preventing them from selling their crude oil, then we would be close to a collapse of the Russian economy. And that could have happened in the days after the Anchorage summit if Trump had not basically capitulated.
But again, the Russians are reportedly dipping into the National Wealth Fund to cover the growing deficit. There must be something at some stage which will sort of, if it doesn't trigger the people, those at the next layer down in the oligarch structure that are supporting Putin will say enough is enough. We're losing too much money here. We need to get back on some form of even keel and get our lifestyles back together again. Are there any indications of that?
No, none whatsoever. And one should have seen that 3.5 years ago. If that was at all a political force, these oligarchs, of course, were the ones that are loving their luxury and their yachts in the south of France and Sardinia and all this kind of stuff. They were immediately banned from those places. And if they were any kind of political force, we would have seen this long time ago. But the fact of the matter is that they're entirely dependent on Putin to be alive, to to be wealthy, and to be out of jail. At any point, Putin could end their lives or end their freedom or end their wealth with one stroke of the pen. And so these people, and I've seen that with my own eyes, I've seen how these Russian oligarchs behave. They sort of thump their chest like the most alpha males on steroids until the moment that Putin walks into the room, and then they behave like these subservient little eunuchs. And that is the basis for which Putin has nothing to worry about when it comes to oligarchs. And I think he has more to worry about when it comes to his own people, is if they ever decide they're angry. And that's one of those things that's impossible to predict. It's it's easy for Putin to target individuals. It's not easy for him to suppress an angry nation. And I would argue that part of the reason that he went into Ukraine in the first place was that he's been a dictator for so long, and people's lives have not improved for so long, that he was worried about people being angry with him. And so he pulled out the Machiavelli playbook and said, how do we prevent, as a dictator, how do I prevent my people from rising up against me? And the answer is to find a foreign enemy and to start a war. And the war with Ukraine is kind of not even a natural war. It's not as if they're natural enemies. I mean, it's more likely, if you're to look at geopolitics and the world, China would be a more natural enemy to Russia than Ukraine. But Putin picked Ukraine because they were easy to fight with and he thought were easy to fight with. It turned out not to be the case.
Yeah, well, I saw a map of the early 20th century of Russia as it was, where the Ukrainian population and those that were speaking Ukrainian and identified as Ukrainians covered large proportions of what is now Russia and elsewhere. So it's interesting to see how it's been spun. But if Putin disappeared, what would the sort of the fight between the next layer seem like to try and replace him? And would there be a danger that in itself could stimulate the collapse of the Russian Federation, because people in Moscow are there will be a power struggle for someone to try and take over the reins very quickly. And as you said, you've got all these alpha men who will think that they're the one that should be doing it because they know the value that there is in that position.
Well, I think it all comes down to money. If you look at what's happened since Putin came to power in year 2000, he and about 1,000 people around him have stolen $1 trillion from the Russian state. So $1,000 billion has been stolen from the Russian state. This money is in their hands and abroad in investments and Russian companies and international companies. And the biggest fear for this group of extremely wealthy and powerful people is if Putin were to die, would the next person then come for all their money? And so as much as these people are the most unpleasant, aggressive, individualistic people on the planet, they're also the most greedy people on the planet. And I would imagine that if Putin were to die in his sleep tonight of a stroke or something like that, all these people would get together and try to figure out who has to be replacing him, who would maintain the status quo. That's all they care about, is the status quo. And I think it would be very similar to the way that the Pope gets picked. They would all gather in the Kremlin and fight with each other frantically.
A Kremlin conclave.
And then the black smoke would come out of the chimney, or the white smoke, or whatever it is and then that would be, and the new president of Russia would emerge, and that person would be, the main task would be making sure that everybody got to keep the money that they've stolen over the last 25 years.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.